Hello and welcome, everybody. It's great to see those numbers ticking up. We're going to give it another minute or two before we dive into the conversation. If you're just joining, welcome. We're so excited to see you here today. We're giving it another minute just for folks to log on in. Okay. Hello, everyone. Again, wonderful to see you. I think we're going to get us started here just for the sake of time. My name is Rebecca York. I'm the manager of learning and development at Out and Equal. I'm really so excited to be bringing this conversation to you today. This is the inaugural event of our intersectional learning series that we are launching as a part of this overarching Practitioners for Change virtual learning program. Started back in April. And this is going to kick off a series of really interesting, exciting dialogues where we are exploring these key critical topics that you all as practitioners are grappling with every single day. Things like non-binary workplace inclusion, to name ours current one. So really, really looking forward to what we've got in store for you all. And I'm very, very honored to introduce the wonderful CEO of Out and Equal, Erin Uritis, who is going to be moderating our conversation today. Erin, over to you.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. And hi, everybody. Really great to be with you today. I want to thank you for joining us. As Rebecca said, this session today called Building Allyship, Building Actions, Strengthening Non-Binary Workplace Inclusion is in fact the first of our new intersectional learning series that Rebecca just mentioned, which is part of the Practitioners for Change program, which is powered by the phenomenal partners at Capital One. We are so grateful for their support and really expanding how we're addressing these important issues, and more importantly, giving you the tools you need to have conversations and move into action. So we're so delighted. The conversation we're going to have today is really an extension of frankly, an ongoing dialogue that we've been having as a team at Out and Equal, what seems like every day. And during one of our conversations recently about, what we're doing and the state of the world and how we as a team are coping, and of course, how we can then better support you all as businesses who are championing non-binary and trans folks, I realized that we didn't, of course, have to have these conversations behind closed doors, but in fact, be bringing the experience, insights, hopes of my incredible team to you and these conversations in these conversations, you are grappling with most likely the same sets of issues and challenges and frankly, opportunities and incredible stories that can work to build empathy and understanding. But before I have them introduce themselves and have them dig into their stories, I want to tell you that I have a story as an ally to this community that is really important that I bring forward to you. And that is that in addition to this role in leading Out and Equal as a CEO, I am also the mother of an incredible 10-and-a-half-year-old non-binary kiddo. We, of course, with more and more young people identifying as non-binary and on the spectrum as gender expansive, these conversations, or as Rebecca said, they're complex. They need to be grounded in an understanding of people's real experiences. And that's the first and best way we can show up as allies. So, I believe we owe them and we owe you as our sponsors and companies a future of work that welcomes people in their fullness And it's really, up to us who are allies to create these spaces to have these conversations. So today, my team is opening up on a personal and professional level to help you to prepare to better meet and anticipate the needs of your non-binary and trans colleagues. And so, as you'll learn today, you'll hear from our folks. If I had to use one word to describe non-binary identity, it would be expansive. No two non-binary identity experiences are identical. And so, of course, there can't be a one-size-fits-all solution to non-binary inclusion. Instead, we need workplaces that will consider each individual's unique lived experiences and workplace needs. The movement as a whole, the movement that you are part of, is really in a rebirth, and it's brought on by the changing demographics in our community, especially among our youth, who in so many ways, as you see it in the news every day, are under relentless and varied ways of being attacked. So non-binary inclusion starts with us in the workplace and beyond, and there could not be a better time to have this conversation. So I really want to turn it over, and I'm excited to bring you the experiences and stories of such a wonderful team that I learn so much from on a day-to-day basis. So I'd like to open it up and turn to this team, and to actually, before we dig in on a few of these questions, to ask all of you, perhaps CV, starting with you, and then others, tell us your journey with non-binary identity. How did you come to it, and what does it mean to you?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Erin. And thank you for sharing your story as an ally as well, because I think that also very much needs to be heard. And hello, everyone, and thank you for being here. I'm CV Viverito. My pronouns are they, them. I'm the Deputy Director of Global Programs and Stakeholder Engagement here at Out and Equal, and I'm also non-binary. So, and it does mean something different to everyone, which is actually what I love most about our community, I have to say. So for me, I can give you the quick story of kind of how I came into my identity. I've told it before, but when I was in kindergarten, I don't have a lot of memories from that young of an age, but this one will never go away. The teacher would say something, on the surface, very, very normal and very innocent, when she wanted to split us up into groups, and would say something along the lines of, okay, for this next thing that we're going to do, we're going to have boys over here and girls over here. We're going to break up into two groups. And I really distinctly remember feeling just this like wave of anxiety. And I was like what you might call a tomboy, but it wasn't, I wanted to go and hang out with the boys. It was, I truly don't want to pick a side. I don't, when I hear you say that, I think, well, where's my side? And it was very, very innate. And I couldn't explain it. I mean, not only was I young, I didn't know, and many people didn't know the word non-binary. So for me, I knew that I was expected to go over to the girls' side, and I did that so many times that I, pushed it down and thought, well, something's wrong with me, and I should be over on this side. And so it wasn't until many, many years later where being involved actually in community work like this, working for nonprofits, LGBTQ causes, I found out about non-binary identities, and it was like a light bulb went off. It was a huge aha moment for me, and I did my research and came out as non-binary. So what that means for me, and you'll hear different stories from Rebecca and Phoenix, which is the best part, like I say. For me, it also means that I am transgender. I identify as transgender non-binary. For me, it means that I feel somewhere outside of that binary of man and woman. I don't necessarily feel like I'm somewhere in between, or I'm moving fluidly along at any point. That's how it feels. But beyond that, it really means freedom. It's the freedom to be myself, the freedom to call myself something that I did not have a word for 25 years of my life, and the freedom from the constraints of a very binary world. So, and thank you for listening to the story.
Yeah, thank you for that tip. I feel like if we could put that on like a button and bring it to Summit and hand it out, that your non-binary identity too means freedom. Like that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that, CV. Phoenix, tell us your story.
Thanks, Aaron. Hi, everyone. I'm Phoenix, and I'm a senior social and learning development team here in Unequal. And my story is somewhat similar to CV's with respect to different aspects. I'm more of a new kid on the block, if you will, when it comes to being out as non-binary. I officially began sharing my non-binary identity in around 2018. And that was after I finally acknowledged that I had so many moments where I just didn't feel complete trying to subscribe to gender binary expectations because I love heels, I love nail polish, and I love other expressions considered as feminine. But I recognize this reality much, much earlier in life. But to CV's point, at that time, I didn't have, nor was I aware of language to fully describe my feelings and my expression preferences. My revelation was also delayed because my past work and military experiences that were simply not welcoming to gender neutrality. And once I understood gender nonconformity in its many layers and realized that my truth was valid, I then began the journey of embracing and revealing the truth of my identity. That was the biggest hurdle for me to really get to a point to understand that being non-binary does not erase my validity as a human being. And too often that was my fear. That was my hurdle in that. Too often, we all limit ourselves by staying quiet sometimes so that others can be comfortable. And I struggled with that and worrying about that my existence would again be challenged by how attractive others would or would not find me once I revealed my non-binary identity. Because too often I'm giving the response that, how are you non-binary when most of your expressions are considered to be masculine? You have a beard, you wear suit jackets all the time, you have a low haircut, those are considered to be masculine expressions. So how can you be non-binary if 9 times out of 10 we see you like this? And so I struggle with that. But in doing so, I recognize that people would think that I'm confused or that I was going through some weird phase or that it was a precursor to gender transitioning. And I had to put all that aside and give myself grace and stand in my truth and not let fear or uncertainty keep me on the sidelines in my pursuit of happiness. Because frankly, I believe that I was not made to be subtle. And so when I consider what my identity means to me, my word, to steal a little bit of CV's thunder, my word is wholeness. I embraced my identity by putting aside numerous societal expectations and making others comfortable first. I allowed myself to step into the space of genuine freedom and wholeness that reinforces that non-binary identities are valid. And it also means that I get to be a witness for others who may feel erased or invisible in the workplace. Thank you.
That's wonderful, Phoenix. And thanks for sharing that, because I think this lens on presentation and conforming to expectations feels very, in your word, wholeness, capturing it is just wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Rebecca.
Yeah, so very similarly to, I think, pieces of CV and Phoenix's stories. I like to say, and I say this often in trainings, that I'm definitely still in the midst of my non-binary identity development, in that I'm relatively new to coming to the word itself. Only in the last kind of year or two have I really gotten comfortable with that. Which is not to say that my identity started a year or two ago. I think similarly, it was very much there from the get-go. I, again, was also labeled as a tomboy and always was doing something that wasn't quite considered the norm at the time. Like I was playing in the mud while everyone else was, playing with their toys on the grass somewhere else. But no, I think it really was once I left my college and I was at a historically women's college, which also I think was wonderful and possibly delayed some of my ability to feel comfortable coming into non-binary as an identity term. But it was also after graduation where I actually found spaces where there were non-binary people of color, which was not something that I'd seen yet. I was seeing a kind of homogenous expression of non-binary identity and thinking, oh, that doesn't quite fit. That's not fully me. I know that I am trying to conform to womanhood because that's where my safe spaces have been, but I've always known I wasn't quite that. And when people asked, oh, well, are you a trans guy? My answer was a hard no. But the word never felt right until really being able to be in the space and learn from other people who are already out and already navigating their personal lives and their work lives. It's really only then that I started to say, okay, this is a term that I can claim. And actually, the beauty of it is that I can make it what I want it to be, which has been very, very powerful and is something that I find is a through line throughout my whole life and all the other identities that I hold. So very much in development, work in progress, but really it's been wonderful to embrace it and actually be embraced by community in return.
That's great. Thank you, Rebecca. And before we move away from you, because as you have described, you're on this journey, you're also on the staff and managing our partner learning work and facilitate most of the Out and Equal education and leadership workshops. So what questions are you hearing from our partners? Because I think this is a really good way to ground much of the rest of the conversation. Where do people's interests and needs lie in relation to understanding and supporting non-binary identity in the workplace?
Yes, so I'm actually always excited when I get to talk about this because non-binary identity is one of these topics that pretty much everyone is hungry to dive into. Now, they might not be ready to dive into it at that moment. They might need to lay some of the foundation beforehand, but it's on everyone's mind. And it's very much that place of like, we want to make sure that we're getting to the point where people know about pronouns, where we're getting to the point where people know about, how to ask and how to make mistakes and correct themselves. So it's just this real motivator, I think, for folks to dig into learning opportunities around our community. But the questions right now, we're getting a lot about how to support trans and non-binary young people. And there is often that overlap between the two identities. So that really is the kind of center point there. Lots of people saying, how do I talk to my grandparents, my coworkers, my friends, my family, whatever it is about my young person or my young cousin, whatever. And then we're also seeing a lot of people wondering how they can go beyond just the basics of non-binary inclusion, of asking for someone's pronouns or putting their pronouns in their Zoom name or their Teams name, and looking for that next step. How can I make sure that my HR team is actually able to talk to non-binary folks competently and steer them to what they might need and understand the nuances as compared to maybe a trans person who's coming in with a slightly different set of needs and questions, and really getting into the nitty-gritty of what does this the belonging practice, inclusion practice actually look like on the ground? How can we train everyone up so that it's a reality and not just something that we're consistently working towards?
Great. Thanks, Rebecca. And when you say on the ground, I'm reflecting on, we're now in, I think, our 26th year as an organization. And for us, on the ground has evolved from kind of largely domestic to, especially in the last 5 to 7 years, an explosion in how we are working with multinationals in particular in a global sphere. So CV, I think I wanted to turn to you and I guess reflect on how, in the US, we get stuck in the trap of thinking that non-binary identity and any of our more fluid identities are US centric or only a US phenomenon. So is this true? And how do you see the conversation about non-binary identity playing out on a global scale in all of the work that you're doing?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's such a great question. And to Rebecca's point, we are, again, Rebecca was saying, our partners are asking us this all the time. We are always working with our partner companies on this. And that goes for companies that outside the US or offices outside the US, 100%. It's still one of the most one of the topics that we're working on the most. And so in recent years, we've seen people and companies around the world focusing more and more on building non-binary inclusion into their programming, into their culture, into their policies. So this shifted focus and the opening of space socially for further exploration of gender identity might be new. Non-binary people are not new. So we've, existed throughout human history. That is not limited to certain geographies or cultures or generations. I'll put it in the chat once I finish here, but Out and Equal has a really interesting resource around the global history of non-binary identities, and it's short and sweet, and I encourage you to check it out. But long story short, from the 15th to 19th century, the idea of gender as a binary was very much a Western concept that was forced upon Native cultures around the world through colonization. So what we're seeing today is people creating more space, sometimes new language, for ourselves to discover and reclaim and express these identities. And I'm talking all the way back to 2000 BCE, earliest recorded human history. We see a third gender show up in ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs. So from then to now, which is over 4,000 years, we have recorded history of genders that are not binary. So this is absolutely nothing new. And to Erin, to your second part, being on a global scale, I think one of the biggest challenges, kind of all across the board, and there are many, but a unique challenge, let's say, is around language. Every language is different. So some languages have a more inherent binary structure in terms of gender. So much more words have either a masculine or feminine gender, such as Spanish and Portuguese, just for example, among others, French, Italian. And that makes it a little bit difficult, because when you want to be inclusive of genders outside the binary, you're changing a lot of words in your sentence, not just one, not just a pronoun. You're changing adjectives. And communities around the world are pushing this movement forward, but it is more difficult in other languages. Mandarin, for example, communities in China are finding non-binary pronouns in Mandarin. Super cool. Bangla, which is one of the more popular one of more common, languages in India, that's already very gender neutral. So that's kind of interesting. There's not much to change there, but there are still cultural barriers to address. So the point is, I always tell people, language is a living organism. When we conceptualize something, we name it. We don't let it exist forever without a name. Identities are the same. Pronouns are the same. We're not here speaking Shakespearean English right now, right? Language evolves over time. So it's an impression of its society. This is nothing new. This is just a moment where language is catching up to who we are. So it's a process. It will involve mistakes, and that's okay. But listen to the communities all over the world where you work, where your colleagues work, who are finding the space to name out loud who they are in their language.
That's great. And Madeline, I can see a question coming in from you in the chat. I'm actually going to circle back to that in just a minute, but I think what I wanted to tee up next is stemming out of, the growth that we see while in the just the sheer kind of explosive numbers around gender identity and evolving trans and non-binary identities, pansexual, bisexual identities, and how young people in particular are coming out. I think along with that, with people coming to their ERGs, they're looking for the support if they're parents, for example, right? There's traditional allies in companies. And I think the more people that come out, as you all mentioned in the beginning, people are looking to their ERGs for support. As also the parent of a non-binary kid, but also as a bi plus identified person, there's this fear or perceived fear around identity along these spectrums being a fad or a trend. And we hear that it's, like just for the young and it's passing and it'll wear out like low-rise jeans or handlebar mustaches. So, Phoenix, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. And in particular, I think what's even more important is what does this assumption have on non-binary people's everyday experiences, especially for those non-binary people who are not Gen Zers?
Great question. I would say that we know that people tend to fear or trivialize what they perhaps don't fully understand or agree with based on, personal affiliations or ideologies. When most folks consider gender identity, they think binary. They think one or the other, and it can be difficult to get folks to remove barriers remove barriers to expanding their understanding. And as such, Illumined opinion comes about that it's trendy, that it's new, that it's almost like bisexual orientation has been trivialized as well, that it's a phase or that it's trendy. For past generations, though, there wasn't language as there is today that captures the varied feelings and definitions of what non-binary is and can be. And even still, there are folks who don't really subscribe to today's language, but believe that there is more exposure and visibility now as compared to before the birth of the internet. There's social media, there's 24/7 news and information outlets that are always there. So it can seem to be new and trendy and a thing of today to many, when in fact, as CV mentioned, non-binary folks, we've existed throughout all cultures and communities of humanity. Some of the impacts, though, that I've seen in past and now is that there's everyday experiences that we as non-binary people experience that people just don't take us seriously. People conclude that we are confused, we are on our way to being trans, we're looking for attention, we want to be so different and get special treatment, and that we want the spotlight all to ourselves. And another impact is that our existence is oftentimes considered invalid because they don't know where to put us, in a sense. Talking about that pendulum, talking about the spectrum, sometimes people just are very limited. They're very much like horse with blinders. They only see what's right in front of them, what they can explain, what they can describe, what they can understand. And so we are, and I'm not a speaker for not all non-binary people, but I will say that generally speaking, that we are truly to the pendulum mindset that we are just, so many of us are on this wide spectrum. And so that sometimes people tend to criticize without care, and that can lead to rejection and fear. And many non-binary folks stay closeted because of that fear of being rejected and being ostracized and pushed aside. And basically there is a lot of non-binary erasure. So what I say to those generations is that to really just understand, to come to the table, to be willing to get into the conversation and put aside your perceptions, put aside your assumptions, put aside your beliefs for a moment, and just to be open to that. And what I've experienced is that there are folks who are eager and who are hungry to have that conversation, who are willing to sit down and get involved to this reality and accept the reality that there's so much more beyond what we've been taught. And so unlearning is a process. As we all know, it doesn't happen overnight. So that process is going to take time, but it's also going to take commitment, and it also takes courage.
Yeah, it definitely takes time and courage. Thank you for that, Phoenix. We're going to move from the macro to the micro and to the practical. Again, Madeline, I'm going to get back to your question specifically around workplace practices and what we're seeing. But first, CV, I want to say and ask you about, culture change is something we often talk about as a primary driver for building what we call the business of belonging. It is a big question. It is the toughest thing to do in organizations. For you, what does culture change look like from the seat of identity awareness and education, building relationships, also in the global sphere and beyond, in all the work we do? What does culture change look like? How do we achieve it? And how do you think we can begin to measure our cultural growths and shifts? It's not a small question, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, not a small question, but an important one, right? This is great. So we talk a lot about culture, and it is a key piece of inclusion, right? You don't have it without culture, but it can be a little abstract to think about. It can be difficult to measure, and so when we put forth our inclusion efforts towards building better cultures, it's easy to get lost in the weeds. So really what culture means, or I guess a good way to think about it, would be how your employees experience the workplace every day, day to day. How do they feel? Do they feel that sense of belonging that we all know what that feels like? And so to get at this very question, I'll highlight something. We actually just built a toolkit that encompasses this. I'll put it in the chat here in case y'all haven't seen it yet, but it's built for a global audience. It can be a little bit customizable, and please do chat with us if you want to learn a little bit more about that. But basically we said, let's get at a different way of creating metrics around inclusion. So it's not necessarily an index. So we've all seen the Corporate Equality Index, different indices, and those are great, and keep doing them. This is a little bit different though. This is not a public score, and it gets at measuring that gap between policies and practices and everyday experiences, which is culture, right? So the toolkit will walk you through different components. There's 3 that we group to make it a little more simple. So it walks you through policies, non-discrimination policies, partner and family benefits, healthcare, inclusive dress code, you name it. Walks you through what it is, and not only what it is, but what are the essentials. So you might have non-discrimination policies, but are they well communicated to all levels of employees? Does everybody really understand what they are and how to best leverage them? The second component, same thing, walks you through some practices that aim towards getting to a more inclusive culture, both internal and external. So your internal practices being, do you have an ERG, targeted recruiting efforts, educational trainings, mentorship programs, etc. External being your community partnerships and engagement, philanthropic relationships. And again, kind of walks you through, okay, you might have it, but do you have all of these essential pieces of it? And then that third component, which I think really makes the toolkit the most unique, is exactly what you're talking about, Erin, which is this kind of, it's very easily digestible, 15 question climate survey, if you will, that you can disseminate to your entire workforce if you wanted to. And it's a very mini survey. It's meant to be reflective and individual to each employee. I would encourage you to get a diverse range of employees to fill that out. But so we've ticked our boxes, right? And now what we're missing is that more abstract cultural piece. So let's find out, okay, we've got all this, hopefully, but how do I feel every day at work? That is the piece that we don't want to miss, because we've seen maybe instances where we've got a lot of good stuff on paper, but I don't feel that sense of comfort and safety to go to HR and ask about getting my gender affirmation surgery covered. And that's culture. If I don't feel that, culture can help. And so we want to get at that. And so when you look at your comprehensive overview of your score, you can begin to connect the dots. And us at Out and Equal, again, this is your score and your data. So, you as a company can keep that if that's what you want to do. Of course, you're also welcome to share that with us and leverage us as your partner. And we'll look at the data with you and help you along the journey to filling in those gaps between policy and culture. And that is really the next level of workplace inclusion, and something that we're really working really hard on right now with a lot of our partners.
Thank you so much, Sevia. And yeah, we're really proud of that resource. And I think, as Sevia has articulated, the real practicality of what companies need and have asked us for met in a way that we feel is very very implementable, very practical, very implementable, and easy to use. We've got a lot of great response from our community about that, so please do check it out. Of course, it's not just adult non-binary people, professionals who are facing prejudice, but it's non-binary youth and their families too. We see this in Texas, we see this in Florida, and in other bills being proposed across many states. What can parents and adult allies to non-binary young people do to be the stalwart protectors and advocates that our youth need right now. Rebecca, you came to us from Smile and you supported LGBTQ youth ages 6 to 24, as well as their parents and caregivers. So based on your experience, what can we do?
Yeah, so one of the most important things that we as the allies, the adult allies in this space can do for our young people is actually the same thing that we can do when we're providing support to adults, to adult non-binary folks, which is something that Phoenix and I certainly talk a lot about every single day. And it's making sure that every young person is met with the specific resources and supports that they need. Now, it's really easy for us as adults to go to a training and hear 5 things we can do to support non-binary people. And that's wonderful. But if our young person is saying, actually, maybe I'm pulling back from being Aaron to like your child, like maybe I'm pulling back from expressing my identity, rather than going full steam ahead, we need to take a pause with them and say, oh, what's going on? Follow their lead, and that will lead you to whatever is really going to meet their needs, desires, ability to succeed and thrive in whatever space they're in. But broadly speaking, we need to be able to practice their pronouns and chosen names. That is critical to their success, frankly, and there's data to back that up. All LGBTQ youth need is one supportive adult in their life, and that will drastically improve their outcomes. So if we can be that safe space for them, if we can be that person who's knowing their name and pronouns, checking in with them about their pronouns, because youth identity is more likely to kind of shift and change as they're understanding who they are in relation to the world. All of that is going to be really critical for their positive development, and it's going to position you as that safe person. Then that next layer is educating the people around you, the other adults, making sure that you're getting them up to speed on names, pronouns, why this is happening. If they don't understand, what can they do, rather than voice that to your young person. And then, of course, there's that third tier of expansion here, which is talking with schools, talking with after-school programs, babysitters, friends of family, those kind of third layer folks who aren't in direct contact all the time necessarily, but who are very much influential in your young person's space, and making sure that even their friends know how to handle those transitions, and that you're a resource for them and their parents as they're navigating that space.
That's really helpful, Rebecca. Thank you so much. So although this is possibly the last question, it's a big one, and I'm actually going to add on an element to this. I just want to, and we'll start with you, Phoenix, but to kind of close it out, what do you wish you'd known as you had come out and navigated your identity, specifically in the workplace? What do you wish your bosses had known, or your peers? And how might an ally have changed the direction or path you took?
I don't even know where to begin, but I will say that I think that for me, it really comes down to visibility. We all know that visibility matters, representation matters. And one of the first things that I've always done as a person of color, as this type of professional or that type of situation, I've always looked for those who I can look to as mentors, or look to say, they've been able to do it, they've been able to be successful, so I have a path to kind of guide myself by, or an example to follow. When I was struggling earlier with my identity, and coming out with my identity, I didn't see myself represented in the workplace from a non-binary person perspective. And so that what kind of really emblazoned the struggle, because I couldn't turn to someone and say, hey, you're just like me, or we're similar in that understanding, or we have this commonality. And too often that's what kept me closeted in that sense. I would say that I would want my bosses and my peers both to know simply one thing, that it does take a lot of courage to be authentic. It can take a lot of strength to really stand in the face of rejection. I will really quickly say this. I remember one time I was having a meeting. I was an HR professional in my last role, and I was having a meeting with someone. I'd never met the person physically, but we were going to meet in person for that meeting. And at the time, I had my nails done and they were fabulous, but I had my nails done. And when the person came to the table, I was very professional. I extended my hand to shake their hand. And when this person saw my hand, they really took a very ghastly, like aback, like they were shocked. And that is what really shook me. In the moment, I stayed confident, I stayed focused, I stayed professional, and I just gave them a moment to gather themselves. And then we continued on with the meeting as it was. I will say this though, what that moment of staying confident and staying true and staying authentic and not shrinking and not falling away, that moment was a teaching moment for that other person, because what that person did at the end of our meeting, once we finished the topic at hand, that other person decided to say, I love to know more about what this means as far as non-binary and gender expression, because I don't know. And I'm sorry for how I reacted initially. And so that's what I would love people to have, is that desire to be respectful, that desire to recognize courage and to recognize the strength that it takes to be authentic in a workplace that may not always be so affirming or respectful or such a safe space, because those areas are where we really can feel wholesome. Back to my word before, to really feel whole. And so those are the things I wish allies and peers and bosses would just be open to respecting, that there's a difference oftentimes with gender identities, and to be accepting, because it's really about our shared humanity, to focus on our similarities and not our differences. Thank you.
Thank you, Phoenix. That's great. CV, how about you?
Yeah, thank you, Phoenix. I really enjoyed your story. And thank you for sharing it. This is a really good question. I think what we all tell ourselves, I hope, what I wish I could have told myself is that things will get better. There's a whole campaign around that Gets Better campaign, and that's absolutely true. Although there are ebbs and flows with every journey, it's generally true. What I would like my bosses and peers and friends to know is two things. It can be at times an exhausting existence, feeling misunderstood a lot, microaggressions, having to correct people or being too tired to correct people, consuming news about anti-trans violence or legislation. It can be very exhausting, along with everything else that's going on sometimes in our consumption of the news. So make space for someone that might seem a little bit upset one day, particularly if there's been an unhealthy news cycle. But also, another thing that's very important that I hope folks know is that it is okay to ask how to be supportive. I think there's fear around making a mistake or saying the wrong thing, especially with this cancel culture that we have. The fear of making a mistake is intense, and I think we've all forgotten that we will not learn without making mistakes. Think about school. When you got a test back wrong answers, you'd probably think to yourself, oh, okay, well, I need to go back and study that, so I get it right next time. And so I encourage you to, as long as you're comfortable with said colleague or friend, ask them how you can best support them and in what contexts that they would be comfortable with that. So to give you a practical example, hey, if you're misgendered, is it okay with you if I correct that person? And if so, in what settings is it okay with you? Is it okay with you in a big meeting? Is it okay with you when we're casually out to coffee? I just want to support you. And I know you're always the one that has to do it. And if it can be me sometimes, let me know. It's important to ask that, because I'll say in the beginning of my journey, I probably would have said, oh gosh, please don't. I don't want the spotlight. I'm not ready for that. I don't want people to look at me and remember. But now I would say, please do. I'm very tired of doing that all the time. So please, that would be wonderful. So just, ask. It might be different for every person, but either way, it feels really good to be asked that. And it feels really good to receive that support when the moment comes. And just, again, along the lines of making mistakes or saying the wrong things, it's bound to happen. When I came out, I misgendered myself for a few months because I was saying the wrong pronoun about myself for a few months. So I understand. And it's really not about the mistakes you make. It's what you do with them.
GCV, I love that. I'm navigating that with my kiddo too. So it's definitely a journey. And I practice. We need to develop that muscle around until it gets easier and quicker. So thank you. Rebecca, I want to ask the same question to you, of course, what you wish you had known and what you wish your bosses and peers had known. And then I have a follow-on question for you related to the people you engage with during our training.
Yeah. So I think everything that Phoenix and CV said, it just hit the nail on the head. It was perfect. The one thing I would maybe elaborate on with this idea of not shrinking that Phoenix brought up is this part of non-binary identity, which is that there's no one way to look non-binary. And of course, over the pandemic, we know more and more folks were starting to come out in the workplace and in their communities. And I think we're starting to see more visibility in our own personal lives. And because of that, just really wanting to remind folks that if you see me or a coworker or a friend who shows up one day looking one way and then shows up the next with a different kind of presentation, that is they're still them. It's okay. And you actually don't need to comment on it other than to say, oh, I love your hair, or I love your dress, or whatever it is. Other things may or may not be welcome to them. So check in with them about what language they want you to use. But I really bring this up because a lot of us are going back into travel for work, and even just going into the workplace and moving around in spaces together in a way that we haven't. And I know certainly for me, when I've traveled in the last 2 years, it's been very much on my mind that I need to be careful about how I present myself in certain spaces. For example, if I'm in an airport versus in the workplace versus hanging out with a colleague getting coffee down the street. And so to be mindful about your allyship in those kind of transition points in particular, because it's often a moment of great anxiety for us as we're going back out into the world, given everything that's happened over the last few years. It might be a moment where you should kind of stand in front of your coworker to buffet any kind of responses they might get for their presentation that day, or buddy up with them if you're going to a new place. Check in with them, of course, to CV's point, but there are some ways that we can physically provide allyship beyond just making sure their pronouns are respected in a given space.
Oh, thanks for that, Rebecca. And you all don't know I'm going to ask you this yet, so I'm going to give you a minute to think about it. I hope it doesn't, that I can kind of switch it up on you. But I think because we have about 7 minutes left, so still a little bit of time, and people feel free in the chat to maybe even reflect on this if it sparks something in you. But, Rebecca, I think ending on that idea and the practice of allyship, I'm remembering something that was so profound for me as I discovered Alok Vaidmanan, who we invited to Summit, and who's probably one of the most visible non-binary people out there, and an incredible intellect and thinker and change maker. Something Alok said really resonated with me and shifted my my way of thinking around allyship, especially to the trans and non-binary community. They asked us to think about this and not like an us versus them, but that part of the issue is that we're not seeing our own gender journey and what people who are trans and non-binary identified are going through and what it means for us, because everybody has a gender journey. And so I guess I'm wondering if maybe Rebecca, for you, or Phoenix, because you are out there doing so much training, CV, obviously you're out there engaging with our community. What do you think about this idea? And do you have a favorite moment or a real inspirational kind of aha when you had somebody who was curious, who really wanted to support showing up as an ally, but in hearing your story as a non-binary trans-identified people, perhaps, that they actually shifted how they thought about their own gender and their own allyship, therefore, in totally different ways. Do you have any favorite stories or ahas you want to put out there?
Yeah, I'm happy to dive into this one because I'm really pleased to say that about every 2 weeks we get an aha moment in our learning offerings in our workshops, and it's a great joy to be able to deliver that to someone. But yes, I think it's completely right. Every one of us is grappling with gender identity, gender expression, the societal external pressures that we feel put on us to conform in one way or another, the ways in which we're trying to not conform and take back some power there. And just the other day, there was someone who identified as a cis woman in the chat, and she was saying that she had a cousin who was non-binary and had started learning about it, but during the session, she didn't realize that even something as simple as choosing to dress for work was so laden in her own gender history and expectations, and that given the preference, she would actually dress more masculinely, and she just didn't even realize she'd gone 20 years and not realized that she actually had a different preference than what she'd been doing for the last 20 years or so. And her takeaway was that she was going to start putting in a little bit more of her own personal flair into how she was going to show up in the world. And it was incredibly simple, but I think it incredibly profound as well.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Rebecca. Phoenix, certainly, I'm putting you on the spot here. If you don't have a story to share, that's okay. But does anything come to mind, an aha moment, or in any way you've interacted with the wider world where people have really kind of shifted how they see their own gender journey if they're not trans or not binary?
Oh, absolutely. I don't even know which story to pull from my database, but I will say that one of the most recent ones was I was actually on a call with one of our partners, and we were waiting for the other folks to join the call. And long story short, the other folks actually were not able to join the call. So it turned into more of an intimate conversation. And what happened was that I was misgendered during the call, and the person profusely acknowledged that and apologized and said, "Hey, I'm sorry, but can you help me, since it's just you and me? Can you help me understand how I can raise my awareness?" And I went into how they could, raise their awareness and be mindful of that. And what that chose for them to do was to say, "I would love if I can share with you my experience about, having loved ones who are LGBTQ plus, or having coworkers who look different than what their pronouns assume, or whatever the case may be." And that allowed them to recognize that there is this ability, this innate ability for people to really be open and open their minds to just nothing is written in stone. Nothing is absolutely certain about life in general. There's a lot of fluidity in all things, the way we think, the way we understand things, to CB's point, how we learn from our mistakes and things of that nature. But that story really quickly allowed her to really understand that I had been limiting my own self because of fear that I would offend someone else. But truly, I'm denying my own freedom. I'm denying my own wholeness. And so she walked away from that conversation really enlightened that it's not just what you've been taught, but it's what you really experience and what matters for you, what makes you feel whole.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. And there's like a million more questions I would love to ask all of you. Some of these stories that I know about you that you told before, maybe we can bring them up in a future panel. But I want to thank all of you, Isabel, the whole team. Thank you, Q, for joining us and supporting this effort also. I just want to close out by saying, we are really, I don't think I probably need to tell anybody because you all are living in it with us, but we're really at this profoundly important moment in time where the demographics around identity are so rapidly shifting, and then how people are understanding themselves and living out those identities in a place where they're earning a living, where they're forging relationships. The workplace is really at a critical point. And so these these workplaces and becoming really even more profoundly places of allyship and education and awareness and empathy. We know that you all are here because you want to make your workplaces different. You want to perhaps have better understanding and language around your own identity. But also we know that most of you in the Out and Equal family go back and use this information to create better, more impactful change in your organization. So we just want to thank you again for being part of this journey. Don't ever stop learning and being in dialogue with each other. Be thinking about your own story, really be listening to others. And for all of us, in whatever respect we are allies to each other, to really think and never stop that ally journey of how we can do better and more, because we all need to do that for each other in so many ways. So thank you again to the team, and thank you all for being here. And we look forward to continuing on in this incredible program. Finally, thanks to Capital One, who is such an incredible sponsor of ours in doing really groundbreaking work and having important conversations. So thank you all again. And we look forward to the next time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Erin. And we're getting some wonderful responses in the chat. So thank you all. Yes, as Erin said, please join us for the next one. We're going to be learning about intersectionality. Of course, I'm sure many of you know about it already, but we're going to go one step deeper and actually figure out how you can start really teaching your teams, your coworkers, your ERGs about what intersectionality means to them and how they can leverage that knowledge to build deeper relationships and really foster that sense of belonging and that culture shift that CV was talking about. So thank you so much. Do register for the next one, and we'll see you then.